Audie Murphy was born in rural Texas in 1925, the son of a tenant farmer who rarely stayed long in the same place. The family moved from field to field, surviving through seasonal labor and short harvest wages. Schooling was irregular and opportunities were few, but Murphy developed two traits that would later define him in combat: endurance and precision. Long days of work hardened his frame, and hours spent hunting for food trained him to fire calmly and accurately under pressure. When the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into the war, Murphy was 16. He attempted to enlist immediately but was rejected for being underage and underweight. For months he kept trying, and in June 1942, shortly after turning 17, he was accepted into the U.S. Army. He entered the infantry, a branch where physical toughness mattered more than size, and where a determined soldier could quickly prove himself. Murphy's early training revealed an instinctive grasp of small unit tactics. In marksmanship, movement, and fieldcraft, he excelled. He learned to judge terrain quickly and to identify firing positions without hesitation. These skills would later allow him to adapt rapidly during combat, often reacting faster than both friend and enemy. He was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, an experienced formation that had already fought in North Africa. Murphy joined the division as it was preparing for the invasion of Sicily, a campaign that would open the road into fascist Italy and test the young soldier in real combat for the first time. The landings on Sicily in July 1943 introduced him to the realities of battle: steep terrain, fortified positions, and an enemy skilled in delaying actions. Under fire, Murphy responded not with fear but with decisive action. His superiors noticed that he remained focused even when incoming fire was heavy, and he followed orders precisely while maintaining initiative. As the Sicilian campaign progressed, Murphy's unit engaged German and Italian forces in a series of short, intense clashes. Each fight strengthened his understanding of infantry combat. He learned that momentum, speed, and accurate fire were essential to breaking an enemy line. He also learned that a small group led aggressively could unsettle a larger force. These observations shaped his behavior for the rest of the war. When the Allies advanced onto the Italian mainland, the 3rd Infantry Division participated in the difficult push northward. The campaign was defined by mountains, narrow roads, and well-prepared German defenses. Murphy's platoon faced obstacles that required both endurance and direct engagement. In these battles, he earned his first citations for gallantry, demonstrating a willingness to move toward fire rather than away from it. His actions were not impulsive. They were calculated responses based on terrain and timing. Murphy's ability to judge when to advance and when to hold position became one of his defining strengths. By the spring of 1954, Murphy had gained the respect of both enlisted men and officers. He was promoted, placed in charge of small units, and repeatedly trusted with tasks requiring speed and precision. As the division prepared for its next major operation, the invasion of southern France, Murphy was no longer an inexperienced soldier. He had become a combat-tested leader capable of influencing the outcome of engagements far larger than himself. The invasion of southern France, known as Operation Dragoon, began in August 1944. The 3rd Infantry Division landed along the Mediterranean coast and advanced rapidly northward, aiming to join the Allied forces that had already broken out of Normandy. For Murphy, this phase of the war marked a shift from learning under fire to applying experience with confidence. The terrain differed from Italy, and the German forces in France were withdrawing under pressure, but resistance remained sharp in key positions. Murphy adapted quickly, using cover efficiently and coordinating movements with precision. One of his early actions in France demonstrated the combination of initiative and discipline that defined his combat style. During a German counterattack, Murphy advanced ahead of his unit to identify enemy firing points. He positioned himself to deliver accurate rifle fire, suppressing several machine gun crews and halting the momentum of the attack. His leadership stabilized the line, and the unit regained its position. This engagement earned him recognition for decisiveness under pressure. As the division pressed inland, German resistance intensified around towns, crossroads, and wooded ridges. These areas were defended by rearguard units determined to delay the Allied advance. Murphy's platoon frequently engaged in close-range combat, clearing enemy pockets that could not be bypassed. His ability to read the shape of a battle, which direction the enemy intended to withdraw, where supporting fire would come from, and how terrain funneled movement, allowed him to take actions that improved the entire company's momentum. In October 1940, his unit encountered a well-concealed German position that halted the advance. Machine gun fire pinned down the leading elements, and attempts to maneuver were met with accurate rifle fire from elevated ground. Murphy and a fellow soldier moved forward to identify the positions. Using terrain to mask their movement, they approached within close range. Murphy delivered precise shots that eliminated key gunners and created a gap in the German defense. This allowed the unit to advance and secure the ridge. For this action, he received the Silver Star. The following days brought another confrontation. German troops had established a fortified point, supported by automatic weapons. The position dominated a road the division needed for supply movement. Murphy again crawled forward under heavy fire, using depressions in the ground to avoid detection. Once in place, he directed the fire of his platoon, coordinating rifle and machine gun bursts with timing and accuracy. When the opportunity appeared, he rose from cover and advanced rapidly, firing as he moved. His assault destroyed the position and forced the remaining defenders to retreat. This earned him a second Silver Star. With each engagement, Murphy became more confident in his judgment. He understood how to conserve ammunition, how to time a charge, and when to hold a position despite incoming fire. These qualities were essential as the division approached the Vosges Mountains. The Vosges region was one of the most difficult areas in eastern France, with steep forested slopes providing natural defensive lines. German forces used every advantage of the terrain, establishing overlapping fire zones and concealed strongpoints. In the Vosges, Murphy was wounded by mortar fire but returned to duty after a short recovery period. Injuries did not diminish his effectiveness. Instead, they reinforced his determination to remain with his men. His leadership style relied on presence, being seen, heard, and trusted by those around him. His calmness during artillery bombardments and his willingness to take the most dangerous tasks built a reputation that influenced the morale of his unit. By January 9, the division reached the Colmar Pocket, a German-held area in Alsace. It was one of the last significant enemy positions west of the Rhine. The fighting in this pocket was intense, with German armor, infantry, and artillery resisting every attempt at insurrection. This environment would produce the action that made Audie Murphy a national figure and earned him the highest American military decoration. The conditions were harsh, the visibility was low due to winter weather, and movement was restricted by snow and frozen ground. Yet it was here, near the town of Holzwehr, that Murphy's conduct reached its decisive moment. In late January 1945, the 3rd Infantry Division moved into positions east of the town of Holzwehr. The mission was to push through German lines, secure the forest edge, and open the way toward the Rhine. The enemy defending this sector included infantry supported by armored vehicles, anti-tank guns, and automatic weapons. Snow covered the fields. The temperature was below freezing, and visibility fluctuated between clear openings and patches of drifting fog. These conditions favored defenders, yet the offensive could not be delayed. Murphy's company advanced toward a tree line where German forces were entrenched. As the unit approached, enemy fire intensified. Mortar bracketed the open ground, and machine guns opened fire from positions concealed among the trees. Murphy moved along the line, directing soldiers to cover and identifying the axes of enemy fire. His assessment was clear. The left flank was exposed, and unless pressure was applied immediately, the company would be forced to withdraw. A German force counterattacked with infantry moving through the trees, supported by armored vehicles advancing along a narrow road. The company commander ordered a withdrawal to avoid encirclement, but Murphy remained forward with a small group of men tasked with covering the retreat. He positioned them defensively, assigning fields of fire to slow the enemy's advance. As the counterattack grew stronger, Murphy recognized that staying in place meant risking the destruction of the entire company. He ordered his men to fall back to the secondary defensive line, while he remained to delay the advance alone. A burning M10 tank destroyer sat slightly ahead of his position, struck earlier by enemy fire. Its machine gun was intact, and Murphy saw that it could provide enough suppressive fire to halt the German attack. He crossed the open ground under small arms and artillery fire, climbed onto the wreck, and manned the .50 caliber machine gun. Flames and smoke rose around him, but he maintained a steady rate of fire, shifting between targets with deliberate accuracy. German infantry, believing the vehicle immobilized and abandoned, advanced aggressively. Murphy's fire cut into their formations, forcing them to seek cover. Several times enemy soldiers attempted flanking movements, but he adjusted his angle and suppressed each attempt. The armored vehicles accompanying the infantry fired shells at the wreck, hoping to dislodge him, yet Murphy remained in position. His focus was not on holding the ground indefinitely, but on buying time for his company to reorganize and prepare a defensive stand. For nearly an hour, he held the Germans back. He directed artillery fire by radio, correcting targeting as he observed movement through the trees. His calm voice on the line contrasted with the intensity of the engagement. German assaults faltered as artillery struck assembly points, and machine gun fire disrupted their coordination. The single figure on the burning vehicle created the impression of a larger defensive force, adding to the enemy's hesitation. As ammunition on the machine gun diminished, Murphy continued firing until the last belt was expended. He then dismounted, rejoined his men, and led a counterattack that pushed the weakened German force back into the woods. His unit regained the lost ground and secured the position. The engagement ended with the enemy repelled and the company intact, largely due to the delaying action he sustained alone. Eyewitness accounts from the battle consistently described Murphy's composure. He displayed no signs of panic, and his decisions were linear. Identify pressure points, apply suppressive fire, maintain communication, and hold until the unit could reform. His actions were not the result of impulse or recklessness, but of training, experience, and an ability to remain analytical under extreme stress. The tactical effect of his stand was decisive. It prevented the collapse of the company, stabilized the front, and contributed to the division's success in the Colmar Pocket. This engagement earned Audie Murphy the Medal of Honor. The citation highlighted his refusal to withdraw, his use of the burning M10 as a firing platform, and the accuracy of his machine gun and artillery direction. For the U.S. Army, the event became a demonstration of how individual initiative, when combined with tactical understanding, could alter the course of a larger battle. Murphy's reputation expanded quickly, and news of his actions reached the United States before the end of the war. The battle near Holtzwihr marked the peak of Audie Murphy's wartime record, but it did not end his service. After the action, he was promoted and continued to operate with his unit as the Allied advance moved toward the Rhine. German resistance, though weakened, remained capable of localized counterattacks, particularly in built-up areas and river crossings. Murphy's experience made him valuable in these final stages, where small tactical errors could still cost significant casualties. That is, the 3rd Infantry Division pushed into Germany. The landscape shifted from open fields and forests to dense towns, industrial zones, and fortified positions built into stone structures. Urban combat required different methods than the mountain fighting of Italy or the fields of France. Murphy adapted quickly. He assessed approach routes, identified likely ambush points, and maintained coordination between squads as they cleared buildings. His emphasis remained on momentum, advancing decisively before defenders could reorganize, while minimizing exposure to indirect fire and concealed automatic weapons. In one engagement, Murphy led a group tasked with securing a bridge on the outskirts of a German town. The defenders used interconnected basements and alleyways, allowing them to shift firing positions rapidly. Murphy organized a rotating assault, sending small teams to suppress enemy windows while others moved along covered angles. The method broke the defenders' rhythm and forced them to abandon their hold on the approach. This type of controlled aggression became a hallmark of how he operated in the final months of the war. The advance continued through areas where pockets of resistance attempted to slow the 3rd Infantry Division's progress. German forces, lacking reserves and operating with dwindling supplies, relied on mines, machine gun nests, and improvised strongpoints to delay the Allied push. Murphy's unit encountered these obstacles repeatedly. His knowledge of terrain and his instinct for locating enemy positions allowed him to eliminate threats quickly. When encountering a suspected ambush point, he positioned riflemen to cover likely escape routes and approached from an unexpected angle, reducing the chance of a prolonged engagement. As the division crossed the Rhine and moved deeper into Germany, morale among American forces rose steadily, while German units often fragmented under pressure. Murphy observed that resistance came mainly from small, determined groups rather than organized formations. These groups were dangerous but lacked the capacity for extended defense. Murphy approached each engagement with the same methodical calculation he had used since Sicily: understand the terrain, apply pressure at the decisive point, and maintain communication across the line. On April 19, not long before Germany's surrender, Murphy's war service was interrupted when he contracted malaria, likely a delayed effect from earlier campaigns. His physical condition deteriorated rapidly, and he was evacuated for medical treatment. The illness prevented him from participating in the final weeks of combat, but his combat record was already complete. By this time, he had earned every major American award for valor, including the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and multiple Purple Hearts. The war's end, in May 1945, brought a sudden transition from constant movement and danger to a period of reflection. Soldiers across Europe faced the challenge of returning to civilian life, an adjustment that varied widely based on individual experience. For Murphy, the shift was substantial. He had entered the army as a teenager with limited prospects, and he returned as one of the most recognized soldiers in the country. The attention was immediate and intense. Newspapers published stories about his actions, and military leaders highlighted his discipline and determination as examples for future soldiers. Despite the public interest, Murphy's own account of his wartime experiences remained restrained. He avoided exaggeration and focused on factual detail. In interviews, he emphasized the role of his unit and the contributions of others, rather than his own heroism. His perspective reflected a consistent view. Success in combat resulted from coordination, training, and timing rather than individual glory. After returning to the United States, Murphy participated in events honoring veterans and helped raise awareness about the challenges former soldiers faced. He spoke openly about the need for medical and psychological support for those affected by prolonged exposure to combat. Although he did not use modern terminology, his descriptions matched what is now recognized as the long-term impact of battlefield stress. As peace settled across Europe, Murphy began a new phase of his life, one that would bring opportunities and challenges unrelated to warfare. Yet the foundation of his reputation, the disciplined, analytical soldier who acted decisively under fire, remained central to how he was viewed by the American public and the military establishment. After returning to the United States, Audie Murphy faced a reality familiar to many veterans: the abrupt shift from a structured military environment to civilian life. For soldiers who had spent years under constant threat, the transition carried its own difficulties. Murphy, despite his national recognition, experienced the same sense of displacement. He had entered the army young and had grown into adulthood during continuous combat. Adapting to a world without the demands of battle required time and discipline. Public interest in Murphy grew immediately after his Medal of Honor citation was released. Newspapers published detailed accounts of his actions, and radio programs described him as a symbol of American determination. This attention brought opportunities, but it also placed expectations on him that he had not anticipated. Murphy responded by maintaining a quiet, factual approach when discussing the war. He avoided dramatic narratives and emphasized the cooperative nature of infantry combat. His consistent focus on accuracy reinforced his credibility and added to the respect he received. Hollywood soon expressed interest in his story. Several studios contacted him, recognizing that his wartime record, combined with his reserved personality, could appeal to American audiences seeking authentic portrayals of the war. Initially, Murphy was uncertain about entering the film industry. He had no acting experience and viewed the profession as distant from his background. However, he also recognized that work in film could provide financial stability and allow him to represent the experiences of soldiers accurately. Murphy eventually accepted an offer to appear in small roles. His first performances were modest, but directors noted that his disciplined approach, willingness to learn, and ability to follow direction closely mirrored the qualities that had defined him in the Army. Hollywood valued these traits, and Murphy gradually became more comfortable on camera. He continued to study acting and worked consistently, transitioning from bit parts to larger roles. His most notable film project came in 19 when he portrayed himself in To Hell and Back, the adaptation of his wartime memoir. The movie presented a straightforward depiction of his service, focusing on tactics, the movement of small units, and the challenges of frontline operations. Murphy insisted that the portrayal remained accurate and resisted attempts to add exaggerated scenes. The result was a film that aligned closely with battlefield realities and became one of the highest-grossing pictures of its era. During this period, Murphy balanced his acting career with advocacy for veterans. He spoke publicly about the psychological effects of prolonged combat exposure, describing symptoms that would later be recognized as part of post-traumatic stress. His decision to address these issues openly was unusual for the time, when discussions of mental health were limited and often stigmatized. Murphy emphasized that the effects were not signs of weakness but natural reactions to continuous danger. His comments helped build awareness and contributed to early recognition of the need for long-term support for former soldiers. Despite his success, Murphy remained private about many aspects of his wartime experience. He avoided detailed recounting of the most violent moments and preferred to direct attention toward the men he served with. He maintained contact with fellow veterans and participated in reunions and events honoring the 3rd Infantry Division. His loyalty to former comrades remained consistent throughout his life, reflecting the strong bonds formed through shared combat. As he gained stability in civilian life, Murphy also pursued personal interests. He took an active role in ranching, a return to the environment of his youth. Horses and open land provided a sense of clarity that contrasted with the structured demands of acting and public appearances. He approached ranch work with the same methodical discipline he applied to other tasks, maintaining routines and focusing on measurable progress. Murphy's life in the post-war decades included steady work, continued public recognition, and a persistent effort to maintain balance between personal privacy and public expectation. He remained aware that his wartime reputation shaped how others viewed him, yet he continued to present himself plainly, relying on facts rather than dramatic description. His approach ensured that his legacy reflected accuracy, discipline, and a clear representation of the experience of American infantrymen in the Second World War. Through the 1950s and 1960s, Audie Murphy maintained a steady presence in American public life. His film career continued with a range of roles, mostly in westerns and war-themed productions, where his disciplined approach and understated style fit naturally. Directors valued his reliability, his careful preparation, and his ability to perform physically demanding scenes without hesitation. Murphy's performances were never theatrical. They reflected the same economy of motion and clarity of intent that characterized his behavior in combat. Despite his visibility, Murphy remained cautious about how his wartime actions were portrayed. He declined offers that he felt exaggerated his story or distorted military realities. His priority was accuracy, and he viewed historical integrity as essential both for honoring those who served and for educating the public. His influence helped shape a period of American cinema in which war films increasingly emphasized tactics, logistics, and the experiences of ordinary soldiers rather than sensationalized heroism. In addition to acting, Murphy explored other avenues of work. He wrote poetry, managed various business ventures, and continued ranching. These pursuits provided structure and kept him engaged beyond the film industry. Yet regardless of activity, he remained widely identified as a symbol of the American soldier. Veterans recognized his dedication to factual representation, and his credibility allowed him to speak with authority on military issues. Murphy's advocacy for veterans deepened during this period. He testified before government committees, urging improved medical care and long-term support for those who had suffered physical or psychological wounds. At a time when many issues related to mental health were overlooked or minimized, Murphy spoke directly and without embellishment. He described the lingering effects of sustained combat, difficulty sleeping, heightened alertness, and the persistence of battlefield memories. His explanations were straightforward and helped shift public perception toward understanding rather than judgment. He also lent his name and time to organizations assisting veterans, families, widows, and those adjusting to civilian life. Unlike many public figures, Murphy did not separate his public appearances from the underlying mission. He approached each engagement with the same methodical focus he used in other aspects of his life. His speeches emphasized discipline, responsibility, and the importance of continued national commitment to those who had served. Despite his reserved nature, Murphy's public presence created a unique challenge. He was repeatedly asked to define heroism. Murphy rejected the idea that his actions in the war made him exceptional. He insisted that circumstances, training, and necessity shaped his decisions in combat. He emphasized that many soldiers had displayed courage under fire and that recognition often depended on who survived to report the events. This perspective reinforced the collective identity of frontline soldiers and underscored the importance of viewing military history as a shared effort rather than a series of individual exploits. Murphy's discipline extended into his personal habits. He maintained a regular schedule, dedicating time to physical conditioning, work, and study. His experience in the Army had shown him the value of routine in maintaining effectiveness, and he applied those lessons throughout his civilian life. At the same time, he remained conscious of the psychological weight carried by veterans. While he rarely discussed his deepest experiences publicly, those close to him recognized moments of tension associated with memories of combat. Murphy addressed these difficulties through work, structure, and self-control. Relying on methods consistent with his military training, his role as a public figure continued to expand as new generations learned about the Second World War. Schools, newspapers, and military institutions highlighted his actions, using them to illustrate the demands of infantry combat and the principles of small unit leadership. Murphy responded by maintaining factual clarity and avoiding sensationalism. His approach kept public understanding grounded in the realities of war, rather than dramatized interpretations. By the late 1960s, Murphy's career had slowed, but his influence remained strong. He was recognized not only for his battlefield actions, but also for his commitment to accurate historical representation and his advocacy for soldiers. His legacy extended beyond medals and citations. It included a consistent effort to ensure that the experiences of ordinary infantrymen were understood, respected, and preserved without distortion. By the end of the 1960s, Audie Murphy had achieved a level of recognition that few veterans experienced. Yet he continued to navigate public life with restraint. His reputation rested not only on his wartime record but also on his consistent insistence on accuracy. Murphy understood that military history depended on clear documentation rather than myth. For this reason, he maintained correspondence with historians, journalists, and military institutions, answering questions with precision and correcting misconceptions when necessary. His approach ensured that discussions of infantry combat remained grounded in fact. Murphy's influence extended into training environments as well. Officers and instructors used accounts of his actions to demonstrate principles of leadership, initiative, and tactical judgment. The emphasis was not on dramatic storytelling but on practical lessons, the value of terrain analysis, decisive use of firepower, coordination under pressure, and the importance of maintaining momentum in offensive operations. Murphy's conduct at Holtzware, in particular, was repeatedly cited as a case study in delaying action, defensive positioning, and disciplined use of heavy weapons. His behavior illustrated how a single soldier's decisions could affect the outcome of a broader engagement. Despite these contributions, Murphy avoided the role of celebrity. When invited to speak at events, he focused on factual explanation rather than emotional rhetoric. He outlined the conditions of battle, described logistical challenges, and emphasized that infantry combat involved cooperation and timing rather than individual heroism. This perspective made him a reliable voice for historical accuracy. It also aligned with his character, restrained, analytical, and committed to clarity. In his private life, Murphy continued to pursue stability. He managed ranching operations and maintained involvement in various small business ventures. These activities offered a sense of routine that contrasted with the unpredictability of film work. He valued environments where results depended on discipline and steady effort rather than public perception. The structure provided by ranch work reflected the habits he had developed in the Army and remained essential for his sense of order. During this period, Murphy remained aware of the lasting effects of combat stress. He monitored his own reactions carefully, recognizing patterns of heightened alertness that persisted long after the war. While he rarely discussed these experiences publicly, he acknowledged them in advocacy work, explaining that many veterans struggled with similar challenges. His remarks were straightforward and aimed at increasing understanding rather than seeking sympathy. His willingness to speak plainly helped shape early discussions around long-term psychological effects of war at a time when such issues were seldom addressed. Murphy also continued to support the families of soldiers. He attended memorial events, visited military hospitals, and participated in initiatives aimed at assisting those recovering from injuries. His presence carried weight because he spoke from direct experience and avoided exaggeration. When discussing combat, he focused on the realities faced by infantrymen: limited visibility, constant threat, the importance of communication, and the need for cohesive unit action. These points reinforced the authenticity that defined his role in public life. In addition to his work with veterans, Murphy maintained ties to the 3rd Infantry Division. He communicated regularly with former comrades, attended reunions, and remained informed about ongoing activities of the unit. The bonds formed through shared combat experience remained central to his identity. Murphy valued the clarity of those relationships, which relied on mutual respect rather than public recognition. His sense of loyalty continued unchanged from the war years. By the early 1970s, Murphy's public appearances had become less frequent, but his influence persisted. His wartime record continued to be studied, his memoir remained widely read, and his film work ensured that his perspective on infantry combat reached new audiences. Murphy recognized that the passage of time would change how future generations viewed the war, and he remained committed to ensuring that those interpretations were grounded in factual detail. He avoided romanticizing the conflict and emphasized that technological capability, logistics, and disciplined execution shaped outcomes more than dramatic individual actions. Murphy's disciplined approach to public life, combined with his precise understanding of infantry combat, allowed him to maintain a clear and consistent legacy. His contributions extended beyond the battlefield and beyond cinema. They shaped historical understanding, informed training, and established a model for how veterans could influence public knowledge responsibly and accurately. In the early 1970s, Audie Murphy continued to balance privacy with public responsibility. He no longer appeared in films as frequently, yet his role as a figure of military history remained significant. Schools, military academies, and historical organizations frequently requested his insight. Murphy responded selectively, choosing engagements where factual clarity could be maintained. His priority was not public attention but accuracy, ensuring that discussions of the Second World War reflected the realities of infantry combat rather than simplified narratives. During this period, Murphy also contributed to written accounts of the war. Historians and researchers sought his input on small unit tactics, battlefield conditions, and the practical challenges faced by frontline soldiers. Murphy provided detailed explanations on topics such as patrol movement, defensive positioning, and the use of terrain in both offensive and defensive operations. His descriptions emphasized the practical considerations that shape decisions in combat: visibility, ammunition levels, timing, fire coordination, and the psychological condition of soldiers under continuous threat. Murphy's clarity made his testimony valuable for historical documentation. His accounts supported broader efforts to build an accurate record of the war, one that recognized the contributions of ordinary soldiers rather than relying on cinematic depictions. He understood that the passage of time often compressed or distorted events, and he worked to counter those trends by reinforcing factual detail. His involvement in these efforts helped preserve a more complete understanding of the European theater throughout these years. Murphy maintained a strong connection to veterans' issues. He continued advocating for improved medical care, consistent federal support, and recognition of long-term psychological trauma. He engaged with policymakers, emphasizing that the effects of combat extended far beyond physical injuries. Murphy focused on precise, measurable concerns: access to treatment, follow-up care, financial stability for injured veterans, and support structures for families. His approach avoided emotional appeals and centered instead on practical needs and verifiable data. Murphy's credibility in these matters stemmed from his own experiences. He understood the disruption caused by sudden shifts from combat to civilian life, and he recognized that many veterans faced difficulties that remained invisible to the public. His steady advocacy contributed to early changes in how institutions addressed combat-related psychological issues. While broader recognition would take many more years, Murphy's factual explanations played an important role in moving the discussion forward. Despite his public responsibilities, Murphy remained highly protective of his personal life. He kept a small circle of close acquaintances and avoided unnecessary attention. Those who worked with him during this period described him as disciplined, quiet, and focused. He approached each day with structure, maintaining routines that provided stability. These habits were not theatrical displays but practical strategies for managing the long-term effects of combat experience. Murphy's disciplined lifestyle extended to his work on his ranch. Land management, livestock care, and maintenance required consistent effort, and Murphy applied the same principles he used in the Army: evaluate conditions, plan methodically, execute with precision, and adjust as needed. This environment provided a sense of order and continuity that contrasted with the uncertainty of public life. Though his career had shifted, Murphy remained aware of the educational value of his actions during the war. He understood that younger generations sought to comprehend the Second World War through stories that felt both accessible and accurate. Murphy's measured account of combat, free of exaggeration, provided a model for responsible storytelling. He emphasized that warfare consisted of coordinated movements, calculated decisions, and disciplined execution. His descriptions reinforced that outcomes were shaped by training, logistics, and communication rather than spontaneous acts of heroism. As he entered his Murphy continued to travel for veteran-related events and historical he attended ceremonies honoring soldiers, visited military units, and participated in discussions about military readiness and historical preservation. His presence at these events carried weight because he approached them not as a celebrity but as a former soldier committed to accurate representation. By 19, Murphy's work schedule had slowed, but he remained engaged in projects involving veterans, welfare, historical education, and responsible documentation of wartime events. His influence persisted because he maintained a consistent standard: clarity, discipline, and avoidance of embellishment. These principles shaped how he interpreted his own experiences and how he believed the war should be remembered. By the early 1970s, Audie Murphy's life had settled into a balance of private work, public responsibility, and steady involvement in veteran affairs. Although his film roles had become infrequent, he remained an influential figure in discussions about military history and the long-term effects of combat. Younger servicemen and historians sought his observations, valuing his ability to describe battlefield conditions with precision rather than sentiment. Murphy remained committed to preserving clear, factual accounts of the war, aware that as decades passed, distortions could easily replace accurate memory. His presence at military institutions continued to shape training discussions. Officers studying small unit leadership referenced his actions not as extraordinary feats, but as demonstrations of applied discipline. Murphy clarified repeatedly that success on the battlefield resulted from understanding terrain, maintaining communication, coordinating fire, and responding to pressure without delay. He resisted interpretations that suggested he relied on instinct or impulse. Instead, he emphasized structured reasoning under stress, a principle that continued to influence tactical instruction. Murphy also remained attentive to the evolving challenges faced by veterans returning from newer conflicts. The experiences of soldiers from Korea and Vietnam revealed patterns similar to those observed after the Second World War: difficulty adjusting to civilian environments, limited access to mental health services, and a social landscape often unprepared for the needs of former combatants. Murphy engaged these issues directly. He met with veterans organizations, listened to accounts of recent combat, and advocated for policies ensuring that all former soldiers, regardless of war or political environment, received consistent and long-term support. In private conversations, Murphy often explained that recovery from combat required time, structure, and understanding. He highlighted that psychological strain did not disappear when the uniform came off. His approach to these discussions remained factual. He did not dramatize the difficulties or generalize the experiences of all veterans. Instead, he focused on patterns, supported by observation. His ability to speak clearly without appealing to emotion made his advocacy effective. During this period, Murphy continued to manage his ranching operations. He valued the environment for its predictability and the precision required in daily tasks. The routine offered stability and provided a counterbalance to his public responsibilities. His work followed familiar principles: plan carefully, act decisively, and maintain consistent standards. Visitors to the ranch noted that Murphy worked quietly and efficiently, avoiding unnecessary conversation while remaining respectful and focused. His financial life, however, became increasingly complex. Murphy invested in several projects, including business ventures outside the entertainment industry. Some yielded modest returns, while others proved unreliable. Although he never sought extravagance, fluctuating incomes from acting, investments, and agriculture required careful management. Murphy approached these challenges with the same discipline he applied elsewhere, evaluating risks and adjusting plans when needed. Yet the uncertainty associated with business dealings added pressure that contrasted sharply with the clarity of his wartime service. Despite these challenges, Murphy remained involved in public events honoring military service. He attended memorial dedications, visited hospitals, and participated in ceremonies recognizing combat units. His speeches during these occasions were consistent in tone, factual, restrained, and focused on collective effort. He avoided personal emphasis, directing attention instead to the broader sacrifices made by soldiers across all theaters of the war. His preference for clarity over dramatization reinforced the respect he received from veterans and military institutions. In 1970, Murphy participated in several historical preservation projects. He reviewed archival materials, offered corrections to military reports, and advised authors documenting the European campaign. His feedback focused on tactical detail, distances, timing, equipment, terrain orientation, and the structure of German defenses. His precision ensured that the historical record reflected battlefield realities, rather than retrospective interpretations shaped by cinema or popular memory. As he approached midlife, Murphy remained mindful of the importance of maintaining historical accuracy for future generations. He understood that the Second World War would eventually be remembered primarily through written accounts and films, and he believed it essential that these portrayals capture the true complexity of combat. His influence ensured that many descriptions of infantry operations retained technical detail often omitted in broader narratives. By 1971, Murphy maintained the same principles that had defined his wartime conduct: discipline, clarity, and responsibility. His personal life remained quiet, his public involvement purposeful, and his approach to history steadfast. He continued preparing for future projects involving veterans, historical education, and accurate documentation of the war, unaware that his long career of service, both military and civilian, was nearing its final chapter. In May 19, Audie Murphy planned a business trip involving several associates. The travel arrangements included a small private aircraft scheduled to fly across the southeastern United States. Murphy had made similar trips before, often related to ranching, investments, or veteran support initiatives. He approached such matters with his usual discipline, reviewing details carefully and maintaining a structured schedule. The trip appeared routine, and there was no indication of unusual risk. On May 28, the aircraft departed but failed to complete its planned flight. Weather conditions in the region had deteriorated, with low visibility and shifting winds affecting navigation. During the flight, the aircraft encountered difficulties, and it crashed in a remote, heavily wooded area in Virginia. There were no survivors. The news spread quickly across the country, prompting immediate responses from military institutions, veterans groups, and public figures who had worked with Murphy over the years. The loss of Audie Murphy produced a significant moment of national reflection. Newspapers underscored not only his wartime record but also his decades of disciplined advocacy for veterans and his commitment to historical accuracy. Military organizations emphasized his influence on training and leadership instruction, noting that his actions during the war had become instructional examples studied by officers and cadets. His refusal to dramatize his own experiences and his insistence on factual clarity formed an important part of his legacy across the United States. Veterans remembered Murphy as a reliable voice who spoke plainly about the realities of combat. His explanations of battlefield conditions helped civilians understand the psychological and logistical pressures faced by his testimony before policymakers contributed to early recognition of the long-term effects of combat stress, shaping an ongoing discussion that would continue to evolve in later decades. His accuracy, restraint, and discipline ensured that his contributions extended far beyond personal awards. Murphy was buried with military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Attendants included soldiers from multiple conflicts, representatives from the 3rd Infantry Division, and individuals who had worked with him during his years in film, advocacy, and ranching. His headstone, like his public statements, reflected clarity rather than embellishment. The simple inscription listed his name, rank, and decorations without additional commentary. His resting place became a point of reflection for those studying the history of American infantry operations and the responsibilities carried by frontline soldiers. In the years that followed, Murphy's legacy remained firmly grounded in factual record. Historians continued to reference his accounts when documenting the European campaign. His tactical descriptions provided reliable insight into battlefield decision-making, and his explanations of terrain, timing, and coordination remained relevant to military education. His memoir, To Hell and Back, continued to be studied as a rare example of a first-hand account that avoided dramatic exaggeration while maintaining clarity and detail. Murphy's influence also extended into cultural understanding of the Second World War. His life demonstrated that wartime recognition carried long-term obligations, the responsibility to represent events accurately, to advocate for those who served, and to resist efforts to reshape history into simplified narratives. His consistent emphasis on discipline and clarity shaped how many Americans understood the war, and ensured that discussions included the technical and logistical realities of infantry combat. As decades passed, Murphy's actions at Holtzware remained central to his legacy. Military instructors continued to use the engagement as a case study in delaying action, use of heavy weapons, and leadership under pressure. Analysts highlighted his ability to maintain communication, direct artillery, and assess battlefield conditions despite overwhelming enemy force. The engagement demonstrated how decision-making, training, and calm execution could influence the course of an entire operation. Murphy's life illustrated a broader truth about the Second World War, that outcomes were shaped by ordinary soldiers who applied discipline, training, and coordination in moments of extreme danger. His record remained one of the clearest examples of how those principles operated on the battlefield. His insistence on factual accuracy served as a safeguard against distortion, ensuring that historical understanding remained grounded in documented reality. Today, Audie Murphy stands as one of the most carefully recorded and accurately understood soldiers of the war. His medals, while significant, represent only one part of his legacy. More important is the clarity with which he described combat, the precision he demanded in historical accounts, and the disciplined approach he brought to every aspect of his life. His influence endures in military education, historical scholarship, and the ongoing commitment to representing the experiences of soldiers accurately and responsibly. With his life complete, Murphy's legacy remains defined by three consistent principles: disciplined action, factual clarity, and responsibility to others. These principles shaped his conduct in war, guided his work in peace, and ensured that his story continues to inform how the Second World War is studied and understood.